Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all, and thank you for inviting me to be here. My name is Lydia Heberling. In 2020, I was living in the Pacific Northwest, finishing a dissertation about California Indian literatures when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out and sent everyone into isolation. Like many surfers during this time, I craved escape into the waves as a reprieve from the general fear and uncertainty that we were all feeling. Also, like many surfers in Washington, I quickly found that some of the best surf spots in the area were temporarily not accessible. You see, up in Washington, most of the best surf spots are on tribal reservations. And to keep their citizens safe and healthy in a pandemic, tribal nations enacted their sovereign right to close their borders to non-tribal members. So surfers like me, driving hours up to the coast, collided literally with the realities of tribal sovereignty. This experience kind of is an anecdote, and it underscores one of the central ideas of waves of belonging, which is this: what might surfing look like when we put indigeneity back at the center of it? Waves of Belonging is a collection of 14 essays written by Indigenous, Black, Latinx, and other diverse peoples. It was published by the University of Washington Press just this year. I had the privilege of serving as a co-editor of this amazing collection, and I also contributed a chapter. The book challenges these histories of exclusivity in favor of examining where diverse communities of people find a sense of belonging, hope, and joy in the surfing lineup. Most of us here this morning probably understand that surfing is an Indigenous practice in its origins. We know that Hawaii is historically one of the epicenters of the sport. We also probably have a basic awareness that over time, surfing's Indigenous origins have eroded from our public memory, except for maybe the most romanticized myths and tokenized figures like the 1920s Hawaiian surfer and Olympian Tupuhanaumoku. And we've replaced those stories with a story primarily about white, Western, and male-dominated practices. We do know that we don't often bump up against what it means to be surfing on Indigenous lands and in Indigenous waters anymore, especially here in California, where almost no tribal nations own or are in control of their traditional coastal territories. Thanks, Spanish missionaries. But when Indigenous peoples and indigeneity reclaimed their role at the center of the sport, we're invited to ask new questions. Whose lands and waters are we surfing on? What concerns, practices, stories, and relationships do Indigenous peoples have with these places? Who belongs in the water? Asking these questions leads to a collection of pretty amazing responses. I'm going to share a few stories. So one author writes that while surfing has been practiced since forever in the Pacific, it is also true that Black Africans have been wave riding since long before colonial contact. Another author writes about Native Hawaiian advocacy for Hawaii to represent itself as an independent nation in the 2020 Tokyo Games, the first time surfing is included in the Olympics. Maybe one of my favorite essays, and I'm not allowed to have a favorite as an editor, so I'm not saying that it's my favorite, but is by my friend, Anishinaabe environmental scientist and board writer of all kinds, Nick Rio, who wrote personal reflection on how learning to surf and learning to speak his Indigenous language were intertwined processes. The first time I heard him talk about this, we were sitting in the lineup together in Raglan, New Zealand, where he was lamenting his lack of language and surfing skills. 5 years later, and just after this book was published, we sat together again in a lineup, actually at one of those Washington reservations. And I listened while he practiced a 3-minute story about snowshoeing with his dog, entirely in his Anishinaabe language, before riding a fun little wave all the way to shore. My own essay, I'm a literary scholar, so I mainly read and analyze things for fun, reads a nonfiction short story about a young California Indian boy who surfs in a surfing competition in Crescent City, and the way an intergenerational community of California Indian peoples came together to celebrate his successes. I argue that surfing demonstrates how Indigenous peoples like this boy employ lots of different activities, both traditional to their own tribe and borrowed from other Indigenous communities, to affirm ancestral and intergenerational connection between people and the ocean. Last year, because of the ideas and relationships that grew from making this book, Nick and I organized an Indigenous Surfer Symposium right here in San Luis Obispo. We partnered with Yaktichu Tichu Yaktohini Northern Chumash Tribe and invited 9 Indigenous surfers and coastal stewards from across the Pacific here to Tilhini, and we spent 3 days exchanging knowledge and waves. We made plans for future gatherings, publications, and works of art, and if you want to know more about that, contact the YTT nonprofit. When we restore indigeneity to the center of surfing, we activate exciting possibilities for sovereign futures, and that's a wave I hope we all get to ride. Thank you.